On June 18, 1815, Napoleon Bonaparte stood near a muddy field in Belgium and watched his empire end. For years, he had defeated larger armies, rearranged borders, placed relatives on thrones, and made nearly every ruler in Europe check the road outside for French infantry. Now, at Waterloo, his final army was breaking apart. The strange part was not that Napoleon eventually lost. The strange part was that he had ever reached this point. How did a Corsican artillery officer become Emperor of France and master of much of Europe? The short answer is that Napoleon combined military brilliance, relentless ambition, political opportunity, and extremely effective self-promotion. The longer answer begins on an island that had only just become French. Napoleon was born in Ajaccio, Corsica, on August 15, 1769. France had taken control of the island the previous year. His family belonged to the minor nobility, which sounds grand until you imagine a noble family carefully checking whether it can afford school fees. As a boy, Napoleon spoke Corsican and learned French with an accent he never entirely lost. At 9, he was sent to mainland France for schooling. Other students mocked his speech and provincial background. Later stories sometimes make this the single cause of his ambition. Human beings are rarely that tidy. But he was an outsider, and he knew it. He trained as an artillery officer. Artillery rewarded mathematics, planning, and the ability to look at a hill and immediately imagine several unpleasant things happening on top of it. Napoleon was good at all three. Then, the French Revolution exploded. The monarchy collapsed, the king was executed, and France fought wars against European powers that feared the revolution might spread. At the same time, France purged officers connected to the old aristocracy. Careers opened suddenly. It was a national emergency and an excellent time to be a talented young officer with flexible politics. Napoleon's breakthrough came at Toulon in 1793. Royalist rebels had handed the port to British and Allied forces. Napoleon helped design an artillery attack that forced them to withdraw. He was wounded, promoted to brigadier general, and became difficult to ignore. 2 years later, a royalist uprising threatened the government in Paris. Napoleon helped crush it with cannon fire. The details were later polished into legend, but the result was clear. The government survived, and Napoleon became the man to call when a political problem had formed into a crowd. In 1796, aged 26, he received command of the Army of Italy. His troops were hungry, badly supplied, and facing Austrian and Italian forces. Napoleon moved quickly, separated enemy armies before they could combine, and concentrated his own troops at decisive points. He also understood that victory had two parts. First, win the battle. Second, explain the battle so everyone knows exactly who won it. Napoleon issued dramatic bulletins, encouraged newspapers, sent captured flags back to Paris, and exaggerated successes when useful. He was not merely becoming famous, he was actively supervising the process. If you enjoy remarkable lives explained with drawings that appear to have lost their own campaign, subscribe to Badly Drawn Biographies. The Italian campaign turned Napoleon into a national hero. He negotiated treaties, reorganized territories, collected money, and removed art from conquered cities. He was behaving less like a general serving the government and more like a government that owned a horse. In 1798, he invaded Egypt, hoping to damage Britain's route to India. On land, the French defeated Egyptian forces. At sea, Admiral Horatio Nelson destroyed the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon's army was effectively stranded. The campaign produced scientific research and the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, but strategically it failed. In 1799, Napoleon left his army and returned to France. His propaganda had kept the worst news conveniently blurry. France's government, the Directory, was unpopular, unstable, and accused of corruption. Napoleon joined politicians plotting a coup. On November 9th and 10th, 1799, the coup of 18 Brumaire overthrew the Directory. The operation was confused. Napoleon faced furious legislators and briefly appeared to lose control of the situation. Soldiers eventually cleared the chamber. A new constitution established 3 consuls, with Napoleon as first consul. There were technically 3 men at the top, in roughly the same sense that a stick figure has several important lines. Napoleon was now the real ruler of France. He brought stability after a decade of revolution. His government created the Bank of France and strengthened tax collection. It established state secondary schools called lycées and appointed prefects to administer departments from the center. He reached an agreement with the Catholic Church while keeping much of the property seized during the Revolution. His most lasting reform was the Civil Code of 1804, later called the Napoleonic Code. It created a clearer, more uniform legal system. It protected property and confirmed equality before the law for male citizens. But this equality had firm boundaries. The code strengthened the authority of husbands and fathers and reduced the legal position of women. Workers faced tight controls. Political opponents encountered censorship, police surveillance, imprisonment, or exile. Napoleon also reversed revolutionary abolition in parts of the French colonial empire. In 1802, his government restored or maintained slavery under French authority and tried to regain control of Saint-Domingue. The attempt met fierce resistance and helped lead to the independence of Haiti in 1804. This was the central contradiction of Napoleon's rule. He preserved parts of the revolution while destroying political liberty. He promoted careers based more on ability than ancestry, then created a new nobility. He claimed to defend equality, then built a family empire. In 1804, Napoleon became Emperor of the French. During the coronation at Notre Dame, he took the crown and placed it on his own head. The message was not especially subtle. His image appeared in paintings, statues, coins, newspapers, and official bulletins. Artists showed him crossing the Alps on a rearing horse, although he actually crossed on a mule. The mule performed useful work and received very poor publicity. Napoleon's empire depended on war, and war became increasingly difficult to stop. In 1805, he crushed Austrian and Russian forces at Austerlitz, perhaps his greatest battlefield victory. His army moved in separate corps that could march independently and then gather rapidly for battle. He read terrain well, shifted troops quickly, and often attacked the connection between enemy forces. But Britain remained protected by the English Channel and the Royal Navy. After the French and Spanish fleets were defeated at Trafalgar, Napoleon tried economic warfare instead. His continental system attempted to shut British goods out of European ports. Enforcing that blockade pulled him deeper into the continent. In 1808, he intervened in Spain and placed his brother Joseph on the throne. Spanish and Portuguese resistance, supported by British forces, trapped France in a brutal war. The word guerrilla, meaning little war, entered wider use. Napoleon called Spain his ulcer. By 1812, Russia was no longer cooperating fully with the blockade. Napoleon invaded with a vast multinational army drawn from across his empire and allied states. He expected a decisive campaign. The Russians retreated, avoided destruction, and stripped supplies from the countryside. Napoleon won the bloody Battle of Borodino and entered Moscow. But much of the city burned, and Tsar Alexander refused to negotiate. Napoleon waited too long, then ordered a retreat. The disaster was not caused by snow alone. Hunger, exhaustion, desertion, battle, collapsing supply lines, and disease had weakened the army before the worst cold arrived. Research published in 2025 found evidence of bacteria linked to paratyphoid and relapsing fever in the teeth of 13 soldiers buried in Vilnius, adding new detail to an old catastrophe. The Grande Armée was shattered. Napoleon's enemies saw their chance. In 1813, Russia, Prussia, Austria, Sweden, and other powers defeated him at Leipzig. Allied armies entered France the following year. Napoleon abdicated and was sent to Elba, a small Mediterranean island where he was allowed to retain the title of emperor. Europe had placed its most disruptive man on an island within sailing distance of France. In February 1815, he escaped. The troops sent to arrest him joined him instead. Napoleon entered Paris without needing a major battle, while King Louis XVIII fled. His restored rule became known as the 100 Days. Europe's powers immediately prepared for war. Napoleon moved into Belgium, hoping to defeat the British-led army under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussians under Gebhard von Blücher before they could unite. At Waterloo, French attacks failed to break Wellington's line. Prussian forces arrived and struck Napoleon's flank. By evening, the French army was retreating. The famous Imperial Guard also fell back, and the news spread through the ranks like a crack through glass. Napoleon abdicated again. The British sent him much farther away this time, to St. Helena in the South Atlantic. He died there on May 5, 1821. He had not been unusually short. That popular image owed much to confusion over measurements and hostile British caricature. His real contradiction was larger. Napoleon rose because the revolution weakened inherited privilege and opened careers to talent. He then crowned himself, censored opposition, placed relatives across Europe, and demanded obedience from millions. Yet armies eventually removed him while many of his institutions survived. His empire disappeared. His legal and administrative influence did not. The Corsican outsider had used the revolution as a ladder, climbed above kings, and then tried to pull the ladder up behind him. At Waterloo, Europe finally shook him off. The ladder remained.